There, do we want to do it big screen or just like this so we can see all of it?
I think that's fine. I have it pulled up on my end.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just so we can see all of it. All right. Good afternoon. We were going to be presenting our current event on how Australia seized $104 million worth of heroin. For our overview, we're going to be going over what happened, why it's a big deal, the big picture as to how it relates more to Australia's maritime security industry, going into the actual security industry and the concepts and ships. So starting off.
Oh, a little too far.
There we go.
There you go. All right, so this happened on September 9th, so about 2 months ago, at Port of Melbourne. So this is Australia's largest port, and they discovered a Malaysian guy who was smuggling it with including of like 1,300 pounds or bags of heroin, and this was in a 450 kilo haul, and then it was roughly estimated about $140 million in street value. So that is exactly what happened. So now we're going to go into why is this such a big deal. So to briefly go over why this is a big deal. So the main creators or production is created in the Golden Crescent and the Golden Triangle. This is located in Southeast Asia and is near the southern route that maritime traffic occurs. And a lot of organized crimes create this, and they're becoming to ramp up their manufacture and production. So this is posing a greater threat to the southern route where Australia is at. And that's why we have to make sure, or Australia has to make sure they up their maritime security, because maritime security is their number one security priority, because they're an island with no surrounding countries of their border. They're surrounded by water. So for smuggling, that is their greatest threat. And then I'll go over the graphs. So this graph, it shows the two main manufacturer regions of heroin. So it's the Golden Crescent and the Golden Triangle, just to give you an idea. Next, this is the Greater Mekong. I think that's how you pronounce it. So it's just a collection of different Asian countries. It's mostly rural areas. And this is where huge production is created. And this is where manufacturing is actually upping right now, as of 2018. And then this is a chart from the World Drug Report, and it is showing wholesale price of heroin smuggled along the southern route. As you can see, Australia is by far winning in the most heroin smuggled by $180,000 worth of heroin. So this is by far one of their greatest security threats.
All right, so going into the bigger picture of why this matters. So one of the representatives, Labor Senator Glenn Sterrell, who is in charge of the flag of convenience ships, he oversees the maintenance of those in Australia. So he's been going into how Australia has a large drug problem. And he stated that drugs come into this country and the majority come by ship. They don't come by balloon or strapped to a seagull or an albatross's foot. So what happens is absolutely nothing. And he sees that this is a great issue because there's been an influx of drug trading, especially when it comes to cocaine and heroin. And there are feared risks that they're not being managed. And this was stated in the Recommended Action Report of 2016. And it recommended a whole of government assessment of the potential security risks with flag of convenience ships and foreign crews. And he also feared that they were not being managed properly in terms of risks. And there's also the quote where he stated that there's a thriving drug industry and we mustn't let the government try and fool us that it comes in on aircraft in huge amounts. Little bits come in via the air and it's through shipping. So the committee found that flag of convenience vessels exposed Australia to national security risks, and it also stated that it reduced transparency of ownership and was leading to an increased use of vessel use for illegal activities. The Australian Border Force also said that it had officers at 60 international seaports around Australia intercepting a wide variety of illegal imports, including drugs. And the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime said that when it came to trafficking drugs in containers, the owner, captain, and crew of a vessel are generally not aware of the trafficking. And Australia's government isn't necessarily being 100% negligent, but there also aren't a lot of countermeasures put into place, especially because they're seen as a very profitable area for the drug industry. We have a lot of participants in the drug industry. Groups like Australian outlaw biker gangs, Mexican drug cartels, Asian drug syndicates, and there's also smaller crime rings that are operating. And in general, it's seen as a very profitable market because drugs are very expensive in Australia. So they, like a kilogram of cocaine in Sydney would yield about 250,000 Australian dollars. But in places like Australia, it would cost just like $16,000. And like based on this information, a lot of drug cartels have started profiting a lot more in Australia. So they're targeting the individuals there. And a lot of the key countries that it departs from are the United States, Canada, Argentina, and Brazil. And as Christian mentioned, they don't have any borders that are connected to other countries. So the main industry that we need to focus on in terms of protecting the people of Australia from a lot of these drug cartels is the maritime industry. They're the biggest front when it comes to making sure that these drugs don't actually get into the country. Moving on to the next slide.
And so for Australia's maritime security, there is about 3 organizations that I found. The first one is the ACS, the Australian Customs Services. So as it says, it's in charge of importation of illicit drugs and illegal goods. So they more or less overview all of the illicit drugs and goods that come in and through Australia. And the other organization I found was OTS, the Office of Transport Security. So they actually regulate a security regulator for maritime security in Australia. They actually do 24/7 around the clock security and surveillance, and they use the AIS systems and things like that we actually talked about in class. The next one is the AFP, so Australian Federal Police, Commonwealth Law Enforcement, so the regular police there. And so they'll actually prosecute the people that the ACS or the OTS actually find doing illegal activities. They're in charge of other things as well, so like fisheries, navigations, and then of course illegal importation. And then to go into the concepts in the ships on the next slide. So these are all the ships and the concepts that they actually use to mitigate and deter all of the illegal activities going in and out of Australia. So surveillance, patrol, and response, I read, there are 3 different things, so I wanted to make sure that I describe them. So for surveillance in Australia, they use mostly aircraft and satellites, so like the AIS systems, as well as other long-range systems that they have. For patrols, they use regular ships. They also use it to deter. So they have bigger ships that they'll actually place along their border, the EEZs and things like that, so that drug smugglers can see them and actually deter them away. And then for the response, they also use ships such as the surface assets right below it. So the 14 patrol boats, they have a couple of those. They usually man about 5 or 6 people. The ACV Triton, so it's a bigger ship. They hold machine guns and a crew of 14, an actual civilian crew of 14 that mans all those. And then they also have the Oceanic Viking, which is another larger ship. And it patrols the southern EEZs, and it can actually hold quite a few more machine guns than the ACV Triton, and then it also can launch an armed boarding party as well.
So in summary, we covered what happened during the actual Australian seize of $104 million worth of heroin off its coast, why it's a big deal, the big picture of how this affects Australia. We also covered Australia's maritime security and its concepts and ships. Thank you for your time.